soon as Big Oil found out where our sacred sites were, they sent their team, guarded by a private security firm with deadly attack dogs, to go and destroy these sites. Those security forces begin to mace unarmed people and inflict that pain and brutality.
This is not okay.
People were laying on the ground crying because they were being maced or pepper sprayed.
The police are protecting and serving a pipeline. They're protecting fossil fuel profits over human beings. They're macing people. They're fucking tasing them in the face.
Sheriff's Department.
Hi, I need to report an assault.
Okay, where did it occur at?
Standing Rock. They're innocent, unarmed people being attacked with water and militia-style police firing at point-blank range with high-powered mace on unarmed people. Who protects the people?
Ma'am, yeah, if there's police there, then it has
The police are the ones attacking innocent, unarmed people. So what do we do to stop the police?
On August 8, a U.S. court handed Chevron Texaco a victory that lets it hide billions in assets in the U.S. that it owes to indigenous peoples in Ecuador, who have been ruined by the corporation's intentional polluting of their ecosystem. The Texaco Corporation, today merged with Chevron into the energy giant Chevron Texaco, sunk its teeth into this rich habitat back in 1964, when it was invited by a pro-U.S. business military dictatorship. The same year, the regime suspended Ecuador's elections. During its drilling there, until it left in 1992, Texaco dumped a shocking 17 million gallons of crude oil into the open, festering pits in the rainforest. To compare Chevron Texaco's damage to the next biggest oil spills that have rocked the planet, the scale is comparable to the BP disaster, the biggest accidental oil spill in history. While BP spilled around 132 million gallons of oil and toxins, Chevron dumped over 140 times that.
The men executed were among a group that became known as the Ogoni 9 activists, who included writer Ken Saro-Wiwa. The group had protested against Shell's exploitation of the Niger Delta.
Pure evil, the BP, Mobil, and Shell files, and all the other oil company files. Deep dive into this topic. Ecocide, green fascism, green capitalism. The government and the oil companies have merged together. A deep dive into this topic. So onto the topic of ecocide, human rights abuses, green capitalism, fraudulent environmentalism, statistics, and documents contributing to climate change and the climate crisis disaster and the pollution crisis as a whole. Tens of millions of animals, human beings, and the earth herself will die, and Mother Earth will be destroyed so that people can have this lavish, capitalist pig, bougie lifestyle aesthetic, a pure gluttony. Under capitalism puts profits over the lives of the earth herself again, people and animals on the earth. In an international ExxonMobil document showed the company's scientists predicted in 1982 that by 2020, parts per million of carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere would reach 410 through 420 ppm for the first time. This spring, ppm of CO2 exceeded 415. The memo says in part, considerable uncertainty also surrounds the possible impact on society of such a warming trend should it occur. At the low end of the predicted temperature range, there could be some impact on agricultural growth and rainfall patterns, which could be beneficial to some regions and detrimental to some other regions as well. At the high end, some scientists suggest there could be considerable adverse impacts, including the flooding of some coastal landmasses as a result of a rise in sea level due to melting of the Antarctic ice sheet. They 100% knew and understood the full effect of this vast increase in heat trapped gases would have impacting the atmosphere, would cause enormous changes, though much of the damage would occur centuries down the line. Shell had decades to prepare for those consequences as well after it was forewarned by its own research. In 1958, one of its executives, Charles Jones, presented a paper to the industry's trade group. ExxonMobil worked alongside Chevron, Shell, BP, and other small oil firms to shift the attention away from the growing climate crisis. The companies, along with all the other oil giant billion-dollar companies, covered up these memos and documents and all the science data in a multi-million billion-dollar disinformation, pro-capitalism propaganda, fake news, green capitalism, greenwashing campaign to throw doubt on the reality of human-made climate change to ensure that ExxonMobil and the others could go on making billions of profits each year from selling gasoline. The fossil fuel industry's campaign to create uncertainty paid off for decades by muddling the public understanding about the growing dangers from global heating and stalling political action. Conspiracy theory to deny science, facts, and statistics sounds very familiar to how the tobacco industry pulled the same old propaganda campaigns. In 2006, a federal judge found the industry had spent decades committing a huge fraud and scam on worldwide public by lying about the dangers of smoking and pushing cigarettes to young people. The fossil fuel industry strategy is the same as the tobacco industry. They are no different at all. Big Oil was engaged in the exact same type of behavior that the tobacco company industry is engaged in and are found liable for fraud on a massive scale, the cover-up, the denial of the problem, the funding of scientists to question the reality of the true science statistics, the same exact pattern. ExxonMobil has single-handedly been conducting a vast transforming experiment that will displace hundreds of millions of people. Some 2/3 of Egypt, 100 million people, will live in the Nile River Delta, which now has low elevations and some of which will be submerged even in the current century. Bangladesh, India isn't going to be there after a while, displacing 150 million people. It has been shown that these regions in other parts of the Middle East will also be too hot to survive. In theory, and lack of water, the water will disappear also too. An unprecedented wave of lawsuits filed by cities and states across the U.S. aim to hold the oil and gas industries accountable for the environmental destruction and devastation caused by fossil fuels and covering up what they knew along the way. But I don't know if justice will ever be served in court because just like I did a video on the Cargill and Nestle files, the Pure Evil series, the judge sided with them when it came to their chocolate slavery lawsuits and the victims of capitalism because the whole entire justice system from the courts all the way down to the police are ruled by the elite, aka the capitalist pigs. In Houston, an activist hedge fund forced 3 new directors on the board of the U.S.'s largest oil firm, ExxonMobil, to address the climate crisis issues. Keystone XL pipeline canceled the project after more than a decade of unrelenting opposition and protests over environmental destruction and pollution concerns. And a court last year threw out the lawsuit brought by 21 young Americans, aka the victims of capitalism, who say the U.S. fascist government regime violated their constitutional rights by exacerbating climate change. But the problem with all this is getting capitalist pigs to talk about and speak about climate change isn't the answer to the world's biggest polluter in the world is the United States military. Capitalism and imperialism go hand in hand. These capitalists go loot other countries for the resources such as gold, oil, and diamonds, etc., and sell the oil, to the military. And the bankers finance, the war, destroying the world. Green capitalism and capitalism itself is not a sustainable system, and capitalism and imperialism go hand in hand. BP Oil and Gas accused of West Papua Genocide Chainsaw Massacre. BP driving Ecocide in Papua. BP driving human rights abuses in West Papua, behind the Indonesian fascist regime's veil of secrecy away from the world, media and journalists who are prohibited and banned from entering West Papua. BP has been busy financing the Indonesian fascist military and the fascist regime of Indonesia and the police force to work as their private security watchdogs and murder indigenous West Papuans who dare to get in their way of their ecocide. BP are at the center of crimes against the climate and the earth herself, and crimes against humanity as a whole. In the West Papua rainforest, the world's second largest tropical rainforest after the Amazon, covering 30 million acres, this is Ecocide, led by BP, is also leading to a slow-motion genocide for indigenous people in the area. West Papua has seen a 36% increase in deforestation since 2017 and 2018, according to the World Resources Institute. At the same time, West Papua has the highest rates of infant mortality, illiteracy, and HIV in all the Indonesian-controlled territories, and top this all off while living under an anti-communism fascist regime that is known, aka Indonesia, the country. Over the last 50 years, 500,000 West Papuans have been senselessly murdered by the Indonesian fascist military, essentially working for the capitalist pigs such as BP Oil. The controversial construction of the 2,700-mile Trans-Papua Highway, a spiderweb of roads to aid extradition industries, is a travesty for West Papua's rainforest, recognized as one of the most biodiverse forests on Earth. Thousands of species being destroyed and driven to extinction, so these polluting corporations and industries like BP, oil, ExxonMobil, etc. can extract massive capitalism profits. Indigenous West Papuans see the Trans-Papua Highway megaproject as devastating to the region. BP is one of the largest foreign investors in the country and compliant along with the other mining companies and logging companies and palm oil companies waiting to line their pockets with capitalism riches. Here are some more human rights abuses, violations, and lawsuits. In 1990, in response to the environmental devastation, poverty, and instability that plagued the oil-rich Niger Delta, Ken Saro-Wiwa launched a nonviolent movement for social and economical justice on his indigenous homeland. The indigenous accused the Nigerian government and Shell and Chevron of waging ecological fascist war and a genocidal series of attacks against the people of the Delta, the indigenous people. The movement was so effective that by 1993, Shell had to pull out of the region. The response by Shell and the military government of Nigeria was to frame the guy for murder and execute him. And on November 10, 1995, the hanging of Ken and 8 other of the leaders dramatically and tragically illustrated the price of oil in those regions. But this struggle has grown to be a catalyst for global movements for Nigerian democracy, minority rights, corporate accountability, and ending dependence on oil. The Standing Rock protests, the pollution, police brutality. Standing Rock documents expose inner workings of surveillance industrial complex, police sprayed, nonviolent Dakota Access Pipeline, oppositions with water hoses and rubber bullets, injuring and severely injuring some, and no justice has come from this via the court system.
After building all the pipelines, after spraying all the gas, after desecrating graveyards, being told they shall not pass, after shooting all the horses, after driving in with tanks, after sending in the dogs with soldiers in their ranks, they're standing up at Standing Rock.
We kept being told that they were coming for us. They, as in the police and the military.
You will be arrested.
U.S. judge rules that ExxonMobil case that alleges the complicity in violence in Indonesia can go to trial after 21 years. 11 villagers from a province there alleged that their family members were tortured, sexually assaulted, raped, and beaten in and around the ExxonMobil oil and gas plant located in the cities. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, ExxonMobil has denied being aware of any human rights violations or atrocities and has argued that it cannot be held responsible for it. The oil rig involved in the Deepwater Horizon oil spill was owned and operated by offshore oil drilling company Transocean and leased by the oil company BP as the largest offshore oil spill in U.S. history, and the explosion killed 11 workers on or near the drilling floor. On September 2014, the United States District Court judge ruled that BP was primarily responsible for the oil spill because of its gross negligence and practices and reckless conduct in and on April 2015, BP agreed to pay $20.8 billion in fines, which is the largest corporate settlement in the United States history. More than 200 million gallons of crude oil and 225,000 tons of methane was spilled into the Gulf of Mexico during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Over 16,000 miles of coastline was affected during the spill. The coastlines of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida were all affected. Over 8,000 animals were reported dead within 6 months after the spill. Deepwater Horizon oil spill is still detectable 10 years after the fact, scientists say to this day. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill was not a short-lived environmental catastrophe. Over 10 years after one of the largest environmental disasters in human history, a sticky oil residue still coats the marshland in the Gulf of Mexico, a new report reveals. In 2021, scientists announced that the pollution from the Deepwater Horizon spill was still impacting marine life on the sea floor, causing very low reproduction and birth rates for the local animals in the area, such as fish and dolphins and whales. Marine mammal researchers have concluded the exposure to the oil caused a wide range of adverse health effects for animals, such as reproductive failure and organ damage, and that animals killed by those adverse effects contributed to the largest and longest marine mammal unusual mortality event ever recorded in the Gulf of Mexico. The Center for Biological Diversity combed governmental figures, news reports, and scientific-backed articles to assess this oil spill likely effects on all the animals to provide a more accurate death toll estimate of all the animals and wildlife and, biodiversity. They found that the spill likely harmed at least about 82,000 birds of 102 species, about over 6,000 sea turtles, and as many as 25,000 marine mammals, a vast but unknown number of fish, from the great bluefin tuna to our nation's smallest seahorse, plus oysters, crabs, corals, and other creatures as well. As for the habitat, besides destroying underwater areas and biodiversity like corals, including substantial habitat for rare dwarf seahorses, the spill oiled more than 1,000 miles of shoreline, including beaches and marshes. This took a terrible toll on species like seagrass, beach mice, and shorebirds. At least 102 species of birds are known to have been harmed in the BP oil spill of the Deepwater Horizon, including black skimmers, brown pelicans, clapper rails, common loons, laughing gulls, and northern gannets, and several species of tern. The 5 sea turtle species found in the Gulf of Mexico, green, Kepes, rowdy, hawkbill, and leatherback, and loggerhead, and all federally listed as endangered or threatened or critical, and the spills harmed them all as well. At least 4 species of marine animals have been killed by the oil spill, including bottom-nosed dolphins, spinner dolphins, melonhead whales, and sperm whales. Researchers report carcasses washing up on the daily, half being stillborn or dead infant dolphins. This oil spill could impair marine mammal reproduction in the Gulf of Mexico for decades, as some orca whales that were exposed to the Exxon oil spill haven't been able to reproduce since that spill in 1989. The BP disaster particularly threatens the species that are already at risk of extinction, such as the Atlantic bluefin tuna, the Gulf sturgeon, small-toothed sawfish, and the dwarf seahorse. The oil spill occurred during the peak of spawning months for the bluefin tuna, pushing this severely overfished species closer to the brink of extinction very critically. And dispersed oil are toxic for marine invertebrates such as coral, lobsters, crabs, oysters, clams, zooplankton, starfish, and other sand-dwelling organisms. Researchers observed dead and dying corals in deep waters southwest of the BP well, reporting that the corals are covered with a brown, sticky substance. Fishermen reported vanishing oysters and pulling up tar balls in their shrimp nets. Oiled up crabs were found on beaches as well. Dispersed oil are all toxic to marine and onshore plants like seagrass, mangroves, and wetland vegetation as a whole, which provide a habitat for and food for the many species of animals in the area. Oil production can have a long-term effect, as in health effects on plants, people, especially plants. Oil trapped in plant roots can become resuspended in the water column during storms.